I'm Angela Merrow, the Elementary Supervisor for Curriculum and Instruction, and we're going to be sharing with you tonight some information about our tiered intervention process at the elementary schools. Okay, so first slide gives you just a brief overview of the process. It shows that our intervention system consists of an individualized approach to address a student need. Throughout the process, data-driven decisions are made in order to provide students with personalized, targeted instruction. Interventions are short-term. They're meant to quickly address the need and get the student back into the classroom. In the end, the goal of any intervention, and it's always our goal through interventions, is to allow students the opportunity to be successful in the classroom among their peers. So I want to show you a triangle graphic on the next slide that kind of spells out the big picture of what the process is. So at the bottom of the triangle, we have Tier 1. Tier 1 consists of classroom instruction that's differentiated and targeted around a goal to address an identified need. After that intervention is provided to the student, if it's proven to be unsuccessful, the student then moves on to a Tier 2 intervention, which is a little bit more intense, and it brings in a specialist, whether that's the reading development teacher or the math specialist. And if those interventions don't work, the student would then move on to Tier 3, which is even more intensive than Tier 2. And the reason the triangle graphic is really helpful is because it shows that narrowing as we move to the top. The reason that the triangle narrows is because less and less kids are in need of those interventions. Where we may have a larger handful in Tier 1, we have very few kids in need of Tier 3. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine and to Rachel, and they're going to give you a more detailed description of each one of the tiers.
Hi, good evening. So the intervention, it is a process. And it begins with Tier 1. That's the first layer that happens in the classroom. So students are identified as approaching expectations, but they're not meeting their expectations. So they need some extra support to help them make their progress. And that's where Tier 1 comes in. And so the classroom data is showing that the student is struggling in a specific area, that they need help to move them forward and progress in their reading or in their math. So a lot of the intervention process overlaps between language arts and math, and there are some changes and some differences, so we'll go over that as well. In literacy, the student is not making measurable progress, and in math, they are not meeting the Dreambox weekly lessons of 5 lessons per week. At this time in Tier 1, it should also be noted that Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions are happening if the children are in that level, but they are still receiving Tier 1 instruction from the classroom teacher. Ready? Yep. So interventions for Tier 1 is that the teachers consult with both the reading development teacher and the math specialist to make goals for their students, but the classroom teacher is the one that is providing the intervention. And so the classroom teacher implements a focused, goal-driven intervention in the classroom that is individualized to meet the needs of that student. So we look at the data that is from classroom, whether it's assessments. For literacy, it could be the F&P benchmark assessment, it could be the foundations assessment, it could be a sight word assessment. For math, it could be Dreambox, it could be the number knowledge test, and they use that along with classroom notes and observations, as well as anecdotal notes that the teachers are taking from working with the child, and all of that goes into what is holding the child back, that they need further instruction to move them higher with their learning. And so once again, the intervention, Tier 1 intervention is in addition to the regular classroom instruction. So in addition to their math daily lessons and their reading and writing daily lessons. So there are some differences between literacy and math with the duration of Tier 1 interventions. For literacy, it is provided 3 to 5 times a week for over a 6 to 8 week period, and there is a minimum of 18 sessions. So we want the students to really have time to work with their interventions with their teacher to focus on that specific skill. And then at this time, both the literacy specialist and the math specialist do meet with the teacher to monitor the goals and the strategies and make sure that progress is being made or if any tweaks need to be made to the goal. For math, it's slightly different with the duration, so it is provided 2 to 3 times a week for at least 10 minutes per week, and again, it's over a 6 to 8 week period. And again, with math, the teacher works on one identified skill, and they are in communication with the math specialist to make sure that the student's progress is being monitored, and if changes need to be made, they are made at that time. So, Tier 1 goals are created again with the classroom teacher and the reading development teacher or the math specialist, and they are based directly on the data collected for that student. It really is important to know that goals are individualized and personalized to meet the student's needs, and what is going to get them over, what is impeding their learning, that there's an obstacle that's not having them progress with the learning. So that is where specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-specific, which is also known as a SMART goal, is created for the student. So here's just a sample. Throughout the process, we're going to show you some different samples of the tier goals, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. So for this literacy goal, it's that Alexandra will demonstrate proficiency with decoding CVC words as measured by a score of at least 80% on the Unit 2 assessment of Foundations Level 1. So let's kind of break that down a little bit because there's a lot there. So this is a specific goal because it's measuring their decoding of CVC. So CVC are consonant, vowel, consonant words. They're 3 letters, 3 sounds in the word. And that's holding her back with decoding unknown words, with solving unknown words. So she will see that in reading and with writing. And so we're asking that it's measured by a score of at least 80% because that's what we deem is proficient. That's what we determine to be proficient. And the Unit 2 assessment for Foundations, that's one of the assessments that we use to monitor the progress. So that's where that all comes in. Now this particular student, Alexandra, is struggling in the area of decoding, so that's her goal. That might not be the goal for all Tier 1 students. For other students, they might be focusing on fluency, where they are scooping and phrasing words. They might be working on retelling or summarizing, which is telling the important events that happened in the story, if it's a comprehension goal. So we really analyze the data to really we want to pinpoint where the student is struggling the most and what the roadblock is to get them to the next level.
And I'm going to talk about the math goal. So as an example for a mathematics Tier 1 goal, David will demonstrate proficiency in adding and subtracting within 20 using strategies such as counting on, making a 10, using near doubles, and relating addition and subtraction as measured by achieving 80% on the Dreambox assigned focus lesson. So the teacher has assigned a lesson group in Dreambox and is measuring the progress. We actually can chart and see a graph of how the student is doing and meeting their goal. So what's important to note about this goal is it's specific because we specify what strategies the child needs to be learning and understanding to be able to do this efficiently. So they're working within 20 and we're moving them away from just counting on or just one strategy and trying to make a 10 and trying to use doubles, adding 5 plus 6 and knowing 5 plus 5 is 10, so it's 1 more. And then it's measurable because we're measuring it by the 80% on Dreambox, what is proficient for this specific child. And then we're looking at, we're not expecting 100% mastery, we're not expecting the child to be on grade level, but this is attainable for David. We're looking at just what's attainable for David at this point. And this is a necessary skill to move forward in math. Basically, as they're move through the mathematics curriculum in all of the grades, they need to know how to add and subtract and use strategies efficiently to do their math. And then it's timely because we can set a week limit. So we can set 6 weeks, we can set 7 weeks, we can set 8 weeks, whatever we deem is necessary for the child.
And it should just be noted in both literacy and mathematics that the goal is not for the child to be reading on benchmark or to be on grade level. It's that the area that is focused on is that there's progress being made there. So it's the specific component here with accuracy and with adding and subtracting. That's the main, it's not, the goal is not to be on benchmark or to be on grade level. We're just trying to close the gap and have them be successful in the specific component that we're working on.
Now moving into Tier 2 and how we identify students for Tier 2. If the student is not making adequate progress in the Tier 1 interventions with the classroom teacher, we will work with the classroom teacher as the specialist or the reading development teacher, and we will determine that they're not making progress and make a recommendation in collaboration with the teacher to move the child to Tier 2 intervention. And now we come into play because we will start meeting with the child throughout their intervention process, but Tier 1 will continue in the classroom as well. So now it's like both of us working on one specific concept to try to move the student forward in their learning. The parent will be contacted to explain Tier 2, that the intervention is beginning, and a letter of consent will be sent home by either the RDT or the math specialist to get parents' consent to pull the student out of class and work with that child. And at this time, an INRS referral, which is Intervention and Referral Service, will be initiated. It doesn't necessarily mean that a meeting will be scheduled, but the referral will be initiated. And then we will progress monitor throughout, and if it's noted that the child is not making adequate progress, a meeting will take place, and a meeting will be scheduled that the parents will be invited to. The interventions for Tier 2, as we've said before, the Tier 1 interventions in the classroom by the classroom teacher will continue, but now the math specialist and the RDT will provide supplementary small group instruction, either out of the classroom or pushed into the classroom, but they will be meeting with that child and working on that specific goal. We will document Tier 1 and Tier 2 on the same form, and so the classroom teacher and the specialist will both be able to see what we're working on, and we will all keep, progress monitoring and look and address the needs of that specific child. It can be pushed in where the specialist will come into the classroom and work with that child, or it may be pull out into the office of the specialist. And it's just important to note that the classroom teacher and the specialist at this point, we're all working together. We're working collaboratively to try to close the gaps that are needed to move the child successfully forward with their learning in the classroom. The duration of Tier 2 interventions. For literacy, it's 40 to 80 minutes per week over 10 weeks. They look for a 20 session minimum. For math, it's a minimum of 20 minutes per week over 6 to 8 weeks. And it is, the Tier 1 intervention will continue while we do Tier 2 interventions outside of the classroom. The Tier 2 intervention goals are developed in the same way as the Tier 1 intervention goals, where there'll be SMART goals, they'll be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time specific, and they are based directly on the data that we have for that student. Now that the student is in Tier 2, we'll have even more data if goals need to be tweaked or something needs to be changed in that student's plan, the instruction that's happening. And they're personalized and designed to meet the individual need of the child. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to kind of take apart these sample Tier 2 goals. So if you want to start with literacy.
So for literacy, this is that Robbie will demonstrate proficiency with reading rate as measured by an increase of words per minute to 85 to 100 on a grade level appropriate text using a running record. So again, a SMART goal is created for this student so that Robbie is struggling with his fluency with reading rate. Reading rate is reading faster and reading smoother, so that's the area we want to focus on. So the specific part of the SMART goal is that it's fluency. and it's to increase his reading rate. It is measured to increase his words read per minute to between 85 and 100. The attainable is that we, again, are not expecting grade level or benchmark. We are expecting that he will read faster. And then is it relevant? The relevant is to increase his reading rate, because for students who read faster and read smoother, they understand the text more, and it's an easier understanding for them. So that's why we increase the reading rate for students. And then the time for tier 2 is 10 weeks. So, and then this is a particular goal for Robbie because of his struggling in fluency. For other students at tier 2, they might not have a fluency goal. They might have an accuracy goal or decoding goal, which is maybe they're problem solving new words. If it is comprehension, it might be digging deeper into the text with making inferences or making connections to their reading. And so those are just some different areas that the students can have goals in that are based on their need.
And for the mathematics goal, we'll look at Sarah, and she's struggling with adding and subtracting within 1,000. So her goal is she will demonstrate proficiency in adding and subtracting within 1,000 using models, pictures, and place value strategies as measured by a score of at least 80% on the post-assessment. So the specialist will administer a post-assessment when the time is up, and that's how we'll measure if she's attained the goal or not. She is struggling adding these, but she also needs a foundation and understanding of place value in order to do this. So what we'll be working on a lot with her is base 10 blocks and looking at the base 10 system and understanding hundreds, tens, and ones so that she's able to add and subtract within 1,000. Other students may have other needs, but this is just one example, and it is it's specific because we're looking at her place value understanding with adding and subtraction. We measure it by the 80% on the post-assessment. It's attainable because this is one component of place value and adding and subtracting that she's going to be working on to close the gap. It's relevant because this is part of what she needs to move forward in math. And it's timely because we'll measure it 6 to 8 weeks depending on the child. Other areas of goals that we could work on if a child was struggling with problem solving. Adding and subtracting fractions, we could look at identifying greater or less than, sets of greater or less than for younger students. So this is just one concept that could be looked at. Okay, and then if the child does not meet the tier 2 goal, we will look at identifying the child for tier 3. So if they're not making adequate progress with the classroom teacher's interventions in tier 1 and the specialist interventions in tier 2, we will then look at moving the child up to tier 3 intervention. And the recommendation to move to tier 3 is made by the classroom teacher and the specialist together. We collaboratively make that decision. And then ongoing communication will be maintained by the teacher, the specialist, and the parent as well. When we move a child to tier 3, you'll be contacted by a specialist, or the parent will be contacted by a specialist to let them know that what we're doing in tier 2 is not working, so we're going to move the child to tier 3. And at this time, an INRS meeting will be held. As far as the interventions for tier 3, they're going to be more intensive, and in regards to the size of the group and the frequency and the duration of interventions. Also, additional instructional strategies may be utilized during tier 3 that hadn't been tried previously in tier 2 and tier 1. And tier 1 interventions will continue in both math and literacy. The RDT or the math specialist will provide the small group, either 1 or 2 students in the group, so it may be 1-to-1, outside of the classroom. This intervention will take place outside of the classroom, and documentation will be maintained by the teacher and the specialist as well. The duration of tier 3 interventions, literacy is 90 to 120 minutes per week over 10 weeks. They're looking for a 30-session minimum. And mathematics is a minimum of 30 minutes per week over 6 to 8 weeks. If the student is receiving tier 3 interventions, tier 1 will continue in the classroom.
So Tier 3 intervention goals are developed the same way that Tier 1 and Tier 2 goals are created. Again, they're SMART goals. They are personalized to meet the individual student's needs. And they are, again, directly based on data collected from the teacher and from the RDT or the math specialist. And we're going to once again go over a sample to show you. So this is Ben in literacy, and we want him to demonstrate proficiency with making inferences about meaning as measured by a score of a 3 on the Beyond and about the text component of the F&P benchmark assessment at a level no more than 2 levels below benchmark. So that's where Tier 3 comes in with the no more than 2 levels below. Once again, we're not looking for the goal to be on benchmark. We're just looking to close the gap and to really focus on the component that he's struggling with. And in this case, it is that higher level comprehension of beyond and about the text with making inferences. So why characters behave the way they do, why they feel the way they do. Those are the inferences based on what they're reading in the story. That kind of brings out that deeper understanding of the text and of the characters and what's happening in the story. So again, the SMART goal is that he is working towards the inferences and that it is measured by a score of a 3 on the beyond or about the text on the benchmark assessment. So that's just a component of the comprehension conversation that we have on this assessment. So, and it again is timed because it's 10 weeks and it is attainable because we again are not looking for benchmark, we're just looking for him to understand that component and be successful on the beyond the text understanding of the book that he read.
And in mathematics, we're looking at Maria. Maria is struggling with comparing fractions with different numerators and denominators. So she will demonstrate proficiency in comparing fractions with different numerators and denominators using multiple strategies such as benchmark fractions, common denominators, and visual models as measured by a score of 80% on the post-assessment. So I think it's important to note in these goals, we're looking for understanding. So we're looking to close the gaps in math by teaching children the full concept and to really grasp and understand the concept. So she's going to try different strategies and work on this and look at models. She's going to use benchmarks of 0 and a half and 1 to compare these fractions, and then also common denominators. But we're really trying to get her to understand the fractions so that she can move forward with fractions when she, as she continues in the classroom. So it's SMART because she's comparing fractions using multiple strategies. She's going to be given a post-assessment, and then the attainable is she'll have different options to use and to understand that. So she'll have multiple strategies that she can pull from when she's trying to compare. And it is relevant because this is a skill that she's needed to, in order to progress through learning with fractions. And it's timely. It's 6 to 8 weeks in the Tier 3 intervention. Other goals that we could look at, like if a student is proficient with comparing, then we can look at fraction equivalence with the student and how we would find equivalent fractions. They can decompose fractions in more than one way. Those are just different options or gaps that the students might have that we would need to close.
Okay, so throughout this tiered intervention process, communication between the teacher and the parent is always ongoing and consistent. From the moment that a teacher notices a struggle in Tier 1, they reach out to the parent to explain that struggle. They talk about the Tier 1 goal that's been put into place and some of the strategies that are using to address the need. When the student moves on to Tier 2, a parent is again notified that the Tier 1 intervention just wasn't enough, and the student will be moving to Tier 2. Very shortly after the student begins Tier 2, after the specialist has had a chance to truly get to know the child, that specialist does reach out to the parent and introduces themselves and explains what goes on in Tier 2. Before the start of Tier 2, a consent letter is sent home where parents can sign permission to have their child participate in the intervention process. And then When they move on to tier 3, again, the specialist will be in contact with that parent to let them know that the student needs just a little bit more than what tier 2 offered, and will be moving the child to tier 3. Upon placement in tier 2, INRS paperwork is filed. A meeting is not scheduled, but should the need for a meeting arise, the process can be expedited because the paperwork has already been filed. You may have noticed throughout our slides at the top we have those 3 intersecting circles. That was a symbol. It signified for us that students, parents, and educators work together to promote student progress and success. And so we are a team and we are a partnership, and that's why the communication is so important. And throughout the entire time, we always encourage parents as well to reach out to the teacher if there are questions, if there are concerns, or if feedback just wants to be given. If a parent just wants to share something nice that happened at home while reading last night, parents are always encouraged to contact the teacher. So the process at a glance, and we set this up sort of as an if-then. If a student is in tier 1, okay, if that student meets the goal, then the student will exit the intervention. Okay, if a student is in tier 1 and does not meet the goal, a couple of things could happen. The student might repeat tier 1. Sometimes the student just needs a little bit more time with the goal, and if they are starting to move and if they're making that progress, we just want to give it a little bit more time. That's one option for a student who does not meet the goal. Another option might be they just need a different goal. Maybe that goal just wasn't quite right, and we want to go in and we want to modify that goal a little bit. Another option for a student who does not meet the goal is to move the student on to tier 2. Okay, for students who are in tier 2, if the student meets the goal, they exit tier 2. They could go back into tier 1 and work on a tier 1 goal, or if they do attain benchmark, then they're just exited out of interventions. If the student does not meet the goal, then they may repeat a tier 2 cycle. They may need just a little bit more time with that goal, or they just may need a different goal to work on. Or if the student is not meeting tier 2, then they move on to tier 3. And for students who are in tier 3, if they meet the goal, they exit tier 3. They could drop back down to tier 2. If they've made a lot of progress, they may drop back down to tier 1. If the student does not meet the tier 3 goal, the INRS team may refer the child to the child study team. And while that's going on, the student will continue in tier 3 until that process concludes. Okay? The goal is always to quickly remediate and push the student back down the intervention system so we can eventually get back into the classroom. Okay? So that's our system overall. It's the way it works. Thank you for joining us.
They're in tier 1, like they're in tier 2, and you're noticing that they're really struggling. Will they ever get referred directly to child study team, or do they have to go through tier 3 before they're referred?
It really is so individual to the child. In many cases, when a child is truly struggling, they tend to struggle in multiple areas. And if that's the case, yes, they can always move on to the child study team before going through a tier 3 cycle. If the concern, though, is solely based in literacy or in math and not really any other concern, then we do like to give the child the time and the opportunity for success, and tier 3 is in place for that reason. So we want to see the child get into tier 3 and start that work before we decide to move on to team. Doesn't mean they'd have to complete the entire cycle. Decisions are made all the time by our specialists and classroom teachers collaboratively, and if they feel like we've given this child adequate time, we are not seeing the movement that we should be seeing, we can definitely move on to the team.
So in the 36 weeks, when you count it all out, like 8 weeks, then it's 10 weeks, then it's whatever, how many weeks it is. It's anywhere from 24 to what I, looking at it. So that's 36 weeks you could maximum have these kids on these tiers, and then what happens after that? Like tier 3 isn't working. So you then send them over to the child study team, and that's 36 weeks. So that's how many months? That's 4 or 5 months now that they could be struggling. Just trying to understand the timing is that,
Well, it's 10 weeks, 6 weeks, so 26 weeks
26
that we're
weeks.
looking at. But through that time, the child's receiving targeted and focused instruction.
Right, and if they're not, then so they don't, so tier 1, they're still struggling at tier 1, you move them up to tier 2. But they're still struggling at tier 1, so you give them a new goal.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, just move them up.
Right.
Now they're not making that goal. They're still not making that goal. They get moved up to tier 3. So I guess I'm a little confused let's just take an example of, maybe if we just go through an example of one thing, like one sort of struggle. Let's just do math. Math is easy, right? Well, it is. It's easier than because reading could be a whole, different kind of thing. Let's say we can't add. We're first grade. Can't add, what, 2 numbers can they do? If they're doing 2 numbers at a
They're
time?
doing up to 20.
So they do 1 plus 1, or they do 10 plus 10.
Okay, so they can't add within 10 would be like a kindergarten standard that maybe they need in order to move forward in first grade.
Great. So now they're in first grade. So
Okay.
what are they adding? Like, what do they have to add to get to second grade? 3 numbers
They need to be able to add within 20.
Within 20.
within 20. So they have
Sums of 20.
So, yes,
Sums of 20, up to 20.
up to 20.
Up
The
to-
total will be 20 or less.
in
Does that
first
help?
grade.
Yeah.
Okay. So they can't. So they start off and they can't add like 1 and 5,
Okay.
and so they're struggling. So that's still like they're really kindergarten,
Right,
level, right?
right.
So then what happens is now 6 weeks have gone by. They still can't add. Now they go to tier 2.
Right. So if the classroom teacher's been working with them in a small group, using counters and using different strategies in order to do that, and they're still not making progress
Right.
with that, then they'll move to tier 2 and the specialist will take over, but also have the classroom teacher working. So they're getting like, a double dose of tier 1 and tier 2
Okay.
at the same time.
All right, that's still not working.
Okay.
All right,
Then they'll
which
move
is-
to,
so
right,
at that time, that's still not working. You're going to go to tier 3.
right, and we'll increase the time.
Okay.
And probably change the strategies. We'll try 10 frames, we have, a whole bunch of strategies and tools that we can use to try to get the student to where they need to be.
Okay.
And then if that's still not working, then we would look at, after tier 3, we would look at possibly a referral.
Possibly.
Well,
Okay. So now
it just
what?
depends
Yeah, so
on
what
the
happens
case.
if the parent, like, now we're in tier 2 and they're like, I think something's wrong with my son or
So-
daughter.
A parent can always write a referral to the child study team. They're
Okay.
obligated to meet with the parent. There's timelines for all of that. The team would review the information to make a determination if evaluations were warranted at that time, but there might also be the possibility that the team thinks that tiered intervention should continue. But a parent can always write a referral.
Okay. But it's up to you would then bring them in and then you'd see where they are, what progress you made.
The child study
If there's
team
any,
does.
yeah.
Correct.
And now so are the goals written so that the parent can see them? Like, are they getting like reports home saying that this is what's going on with our child?
Like we talked about, the parents are very involved in the process, and if they feel like, if a parent feels like they want more information or they need more information, that's something they can certainly reach out to get.
Okay, but are the goals sent home to them, or the goals are in here? These are the goals, right? Tier 1. Do the parents know what you're working on, or you don't get them involved until tier 2?
No, I think the classroom teacher absolutely will call the parent and
Okay.
share the goal that they're doing in the classroom, and then, should the child be moved to tier 2, then the specialist will contact the parent to talk about the goal. And then, again, if progress is not being made, we'll have an IRS meeting, and a SMART plan will be written with the goal that gets sent home and signed by the parent.
So if you're in tier 3, excuse me, and can you repeat tier 3 or is it automatically you're done with tier 3 in your 10 weeks and then you move on to the next? Because if you're not progressing,
you know what I mean?
I think it's very case by case.
Okay.
We have to look at exactly how much progress was made, what kind of progress was
Okay.
made, is this the right goal? It really is so based on the student.
Okay.
We follow guidelines, but at the same time, we do make data-driven decisions
Okay.
off of those
Okay.
guidelines.
Are there multiple goals or just one goal? Like say in the case of reading, right? They can't read, they just can't read a paragraph nor understand it. That would be two types of things, right? So do you have multiple goals in these tiers, or is it one specific goal at a time?
There might be a few goals. They kind of work off of each other. Sometimes it's they build off of each other. So sometimes there might be two goals created for the student. But again, it's case by case. It depends on what the need is and what their focus is.
And I just want to jump in for a moment because you specified that they can't read and they can't understand. But in a case like that, they're not going to understand the paragraph unless they can read it. And
Well,
so the goals would just be focused on the reading side of that.
Well, you know, there's kids who don't understand words, so they'll
Right.
just read, but they don't understand the
Yes.
words. They'll read and they can't read
Sure.
fluently.
Right.
You know, so you know, there's two things going on here, right? They can't read they don't understand the words.
Right.
They can't read a whole sentence without
Yes.
you know having a
So
problem.
we take a look at like the sequence of progression. What is the one thing we need to fix first in order to get
Okay.
the other one to fall into place?
All right.
Many times once we fix that first thing, the second one just follows.
I just have to add, the reading development teachers and Mrs. Merrow, I'm speaking just from literacy now, I'm sure Mrs. Crusoe feels the same way about the math specialists. They have such in-depth knowledge about literacy, how students go from a student that doesn't even know the alphabet to an early emergent reader to a student who can fluently read, decode, and comprehend. It's a very sequential process. You can't skip over certain steps, and they are so tuned in to where students are and what's that next step they need to take to make them ready for the next step. It's a continuum that's ongoing, and I think that their skill set in honing in on what does this student need at this point in time to get them to the next step is essential. And when and if they may find a student has closed the gap and exited tier 1, 2, or 3, but then later on, let's say that happens in first grade, but let's say later on in 4th or 5th grade, when they begin to deal with much more complex text, they may realize now the student has a problem with making inferences and really truly understanding an author's purpose or comparing two different viewpoints. They may enter the intervention process again, but now with a very different goal in mind, to work on their comprehension skills. So it's not a one size fits all. It's really very student specific and sequential skill, one based upon the other. Does that make sense?
I understand that.
Okay.
I do understand that. So, but it's just how the process goes. It's a long time. You know, it's 4 months. You know, where how does it? Yes, you want, but sometimes at that like second level, it's just not going to work. But let's just go to the next. So just I know parents can call at any time and say,
Sure.
hey, I want write a letter and that's it. But it's just it seems like a long time.
But with this process, we've really seen a lot of success, and we do see that the students, if they have to move on to
They can't
the
exit
tier
sooner.
3, right?
They
And
can't
a lot of the
exit
students
Yeah,
do
I'm just
exit, but-
Sure.
just a little jaded at times. So you have
But
to
it is
understand.
very individualized, you have to
Yes,
understand.
yes. No, this
It's a generic-
is good. Since my kids started until now, this is good because people do fall through the cracks, and that's unfortunate because then you get to a certain level, you get to 3rd, 4th grade, and it's a whole nother world, and you don't have those bases that you had kindergarten, 1st grade. So it's, bringing in the math specialists and the reading specialists was a great thing. I have to say.
Agreed. I mean,
Yeah.
the heart
And they're
of-
determined,
Right, but my kids are beyond, they're a little bit older than that, so they didn't have that. So, just,
I have to stress that the heart and the soul and the pure intent of the intervention program is to give students the gift of time to determine, is their need something that's developmental, that gap may close in time with a little bit of assistance or more in-depth assistance. As far as tier 3, is it developmental, and is it something that we just need to offer that bridge to that student to close that gap and put them on grade level so that they are, working happily in their classroom with their peers, feeling, very confident. And if not, we certainly have our very, fluent special education educators who would help assist in the process that would need more in-depth interventions.
To what grade do you all do the intervention system? And then about how many students in Middletown would you say, as a percentage of students at one point or another, will avail themselves of these resources?
We're K through 5, so we work up through 5th grade at reading and math specialists.
And I think through the process, it depends on the tier, like the triangle illustrated. We could have up to maybe 10% or so of a class who is in need of tier 1 intervention, but that percentage decreases as we move up the tiers because we are able to remediate so many of the students' needs in tier 1, and only a small amount will filter up to tier 2, and then in that case we're able to remediate many of those, and very few then move on to tier 3.
And so do the tiers continue in middle school? Is that a separate intervention, or that doesn't exist?
These 3 ladies work only in our elementary schools, and that was what our presentation was geared for tonight. However, to answer your question, do we have interventions in the middle school? We do. Okay, it's slightly different. There's less personnel involved. It's a newer program, but we do have interventionists in our middle schools currently, and we're planning to continue them in both literacy and in mathematics.
And we found that the new middle school schedule, which allows students to have advisory periods, gives us one more opportunity in which to provide interventions. Not that that's the only time that they would be working with an interventionist, but that does give us time that doesn't impact other classes to provide interventions, whether it be language arts or mathematics. And again, that's a process that we're building, and we hope to grow.
And parents are still informed. There's still a letter that goes
Yes.
home. That part of
Yes,
the process is, of course, the
absolutely.
same.
To the reading specialist and the math specialist, so if you have an in-class support, so you have kids who are in class support, right? So you have kids who have math issues or people have reading issues. Are you separate from those in-class support teachers, or are you separate? Okay. So you're not working with the kids with the IEP?
Yeah, so there's different certifications for the special ed teachers who would be in an in-class support setting.
Okay.
However, the support of any of our specialists in our buildings do collaborate and work on a consultation basis with all of the teachers. There are resources.
Right,
for
but they're
everybody.
going into the classroom for for kids with
intervention. Who are getting
intervention, then you have
specifically.
kids who are
We look at all
classified.
of the students. We don't separate them in that sense, but
Well,
they might be working with particular
but you do
students.
separate them in a classroom, don't you? Like, I mean, if you have in-class support and there's 5 kids in that class and you have an in-class support teacher, that in-class support teacher is for those 5 kids. Yes, she does help
On a regular
everybody else on a regular basis. Now you got 4 kids who need intervention, right? Aside for those 5. Those 4 kids are not included with those in-class support teachers. They come in and work with those kids, or no? How does that work? You're in an in-class support situation and you have 5 kids with an IEP and 4 kids who are now need intervention. How does that work?
Did you want to? Well, I was just going to say, like for math, the interventions don't occur during the daily math instructional block. So the students who are in tier 2 or tier 3, we will take them at a time that's not during their math instruction. So they're still getting the instruction
Okay,
from the
because you
teacher.
said, so in one of those slides it said you either come in or you pull them
Yeah,
out.
sometimes you can push
Right.
in, but again, it wouldn't be during math. It might be during social studies. It might be during a set intervention time that the teacher has in their schedule.
If the child needs additional help with math, you don't want them to miss the math lesson. You want to give them more time in math.
Right.
No, I'm just asking you how it works in the classroom, you know what I mean? Because now you have a lot of people here in the
It
classroom.
depends on the tier also.
It does.
Yes,
Tier
so-
2 or 3 is outside of the classroom.
Right.
The push-in would only be in tier 1, maybe tier 2.
Right.
Maybe. Tier 3 is more intense and it's outside, so it depends
Right,
on
but
which
they're
tier.
working with the kids intervention, they're not working with the kids who are classified IEP. That's the in-class support.
But that co-teacher is working with them during the math lesson, whereas the interventionist is pulling them, is not going
It's
to
gonna
let
pull
them
them,
miss
it's
math.
gonna pull
Does that
them.
help a little bit? That's a big difference. The co-teacher,
Okay,
as per the IEP, is there for the math lesson the whole time, working with them. Whereas
The whole
they're pulling
block.
them at a different time.
Yeah.
oh,
The
it's different,
intervention
okay.
students, right.
So they'll pull, okay, and
Okay.
they'll pull them out. Okay.
Kind of like the fun club, stuff like that.
I can't hear you.
I said, my one daughter's, she's,
I still can't hear you. I'm
she's in
sorry.
kindergarten.
Okay.
Like, they pull her out for the fun club.
Fun club.
Yeah,
For the fun.
What is that?
Is that when she receives her intervention?
yeah. Well,
Oh, so, I don't know, maybe somebody
well, I mean,
They like.
it's kind of geared so at least
She's
she's
happy.
more,
It is fun.
well-
We can make it fun.
Positive, very positive.
yeah, more positive
Yeah.
impact as opposed to
Okay.
negative impact. But so that would be somewhere in probably the tier 3, I guess.
Could be tier 2.
Tier two,
Could
right.
be tier
Tier
2.
two, right.
Could be tier 2. Definitely tier 3. Right. Would be a pullout. I just haven't heard the term fun club.
Yeah, I haven't.
But I get why
Maybe
they would
I'll-
call it that with children, yes.
Well,
That works.
she may have a hard time with it, so that's why if you phase it a different way, it could go a little bit easier.
So to dovetail on her question, as far as the amount of time that a student can spend either from tier 1 to tier 3, it sounds like you can go up and go down and go back, exit out, come back. Is there ever like a time frame that a parent should say, it's been a while, could this go on for years and years, and then, is there ever that type of scenario, or should there be okay, after maybe 2 years in the tier system, maybe it's time to look further? Any thoughts on that?
The intervention, it's a very fluid process, so the kids do, the goal is for them not to be in it for a long period of time. There is a definite time frame, which is different for different students. It really is on a case-by-case and student need basis, but that's the communication that comes in between the parents and the RDT or the math specialist, that the communication is there between the two of you when progress is made, as well as when there are some concerns that maybe the next tier needs to be put into place or goals need to be tweaked to to meet those needs and further the progression. So that is it's a definite a finite time in terms of that it doesn't go on for years and years and years. We want the students to have the services that they need and be successful in their learning. Anybody else?
Well, you don't have to end questions now
Thank
anyway.
you.
We're always available. You
Yes.
can contact us at any time, okay? Or the specialist
And
in your building.
reach out to your
Yeah, that's
school,
right.
your child's school's reading development teacher or mathematics specialist at any time.
Please don't hesitate to reach out to your reading development teacher or math specialist. They can be a tremendous resource, even if your child is not in interventions, even if you just have concerns or questions. I mean, the classroom teacher is the first place to start. So if you have any concern, that's where that first level of communication needs to start. If the teacher's not reaching out to you and you feel that there's some learning issue or emotional issue or whatever, you need to reach out to the teacher and let them know you are your child's first and strongest and most significant advocate. And as a mother, I can say that with absolute certainty. And we respect that and want that communication line to remain open on a consistent basis. Because there could be things you could be sharing that could help people that are working with your children to be more effective and to do things like call it the fun club. I love that.
Well,
That's a great
that's
idea.
what he refers to it as.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, that's great.
he's
Yes.
tight on verbiage and whatnot, so.
Of course. Of course. Yes.
Can I ask
Thank
what
you.
school that is? It's cute. I like it.
What's that?
What school is that? If you don't mind.
It's this one right over here.
New Mama?
Yeah, there.
New Mama?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Great.
Thank you so much for coming. We
Thank you
really
for
appreciate
staying
it.
as well
for
and being
doing
with
this.
us.